The night was colder than death. The alien mother held her child close, wrapping her thin arms around the small body that shook with every icy wind. Snow fell like knives from the dark sky, and the endless white ground gave no mercy. Her legs were weak, her eyes heavy, and her stomach empty. Yet she forced herself to walk, step by step, carrying hope that refused to die. The child whispered with a dry voice, asking for food, for water, for warmth. But the mother had nothing left. Her lips were cracked, her hands trembling, her heart breaking with every cry she could not answer. Once their village had been full of light and voices, but now it was gone, swallowed by the storms and beasts that ruled this planet. Now only she and her child remained, hunted by hunger, hunted by the cold, hunted by silence itself. She saw a dark shadow ahead, a black opening in the white mountains, a cave. Her breath caught as she stumbled toward it, dragging her child into the darkness. Inside, the air was still cold, but the wind could not reach them. The cave smelled of ice and stone, sharp and empty. Yet it was safer than the open plains. She sank to her knees, laying her child against the wall, brushing snow from the little one's hair. The child closed their eyes. Weak, too weak. The mother's heart panicked, her mind screamed, but her body was too tired to move. She pressed her forehead against her child's and whispered promises she was not sure she could keep. She told them the night would pass, the dawn would come, the stars would guide them. But even she could not see how, not in this frozen night. Time felt heavy inside the cave, every second stretched into an hour. The mother hugged her child tighter, trying to share her last warmth. She thought of her own mother, of stories told by the fire long ago, stories of gods and protectors, of heroes who walked in the storms and saved the lost. She wondered if those stories were lies, or if such protectors had long forgotten this broken planet. Then the silence broke. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. Footsteps, slow and heavy, crunching against the frozen floor. The mother froze, her heart racing, fear taking hold of her. She pushed her child behind her, shielding the small body with her own, her eyes staring at the entrance of the cave. The sound grew closer. The air grew tense. A shape appeared in the shadows, tall, broad, wrapped in strange cloth, carrying a dim light that flickered on the stone walls. The figure moved like a ghost from the storm, yet its breathing was heavy, real, alive. The mother's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, but no voice came. Only her hands tightened on her child. The figure stopped, standing only a few steps away. The light revealed a face, strange, different, not of her kind. Two eyes glowed in the torchlight, a human's eyes. She had heard of humans, whispers from traders, stories told in fear and doubt. Some called them dangerous, some called them saviors, but she had never seen one. Not until now, not in the middle of this deadly night. The human's gaze fell upon her and her child. He did not move for a long moment, only watched. Breathing clouds into the cold air, the mother's heart pounded, ready to defend, ready to die. But then, something unexpected happened. The human knelt slowly, setting down his pack, his movements careful, as if not to scare them. From the pack he pulled out something small, wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it and held it forward. It was food, a piece of bread. The mother's eyes widened. Her child stirred weakly behind her. Her mind screamed not to trust, but her body shook with hunger, with fear, with hope. The human's hand did not shake, his eyes calm but tired, as if he too had walked through storms and carried his own ghosts. He placed the bread on the ground between them and stepped back. The silence returned, but now it was different. The cave was no longer only stone and ice. It was a place of choice, a place where one act could mean life or death, trust or betrayal. The mother stared at the bread, then at the human. Her heart whispered the question she could not speak. Why? Why would a stranger share hope in the middle of a frozen night? Why would anyone risk kindness on a planet that killed everyone? The cave waited for her answer. The storm outside roared louder, but inside the world was small. Only her child, and the human who had brought light into the darkness. And so the frozen night was no longer silent. It held the sound of breathing, the warmth of a fire not yet lit, and the fragile spark of something greater than fear, courage. The cave was silent after the bread was placed on the stone. The alien mother sat frozen, torn between fear and need, her arms locked around her child. The torchlight flickered, throwing shadows across the walls. And in those shadows, the human stood tall and strange, breathing steady as if waiting. The mother's heart beat like a drum in her chest. Her eyes darted between the stranger's face and the bread. The child whimpered, the sound weak but desperate, reaching out a small hand toward the food. The mother caught that hand quickly, holding it down, whispering softly for silence, but her own stomach growled, the sound loud in the emptiness of the cave, and shame burned in her chest. The human shifted slightly, not stepping closer, not stepping away. He reached into his pack, again pulling out a small bundle of sticks and something metallic. The mother tensed, fearing it was a weapon, but soon a spark flashed and the smell of smoke filled the cave. The human was making fire, the cave lit with a fragile flame, the warmth spreading like a miracle against the cold walls. The mother's child gasped, eyes wide at the sight of fire, something they had not seen in so long. The human fed the flame with patience, adding wood until it grew steady and strong. He sat down on the stone floor beside it, setting the torch aside, letting the fire paint his face. The mother studied him carefully now. His skin was pale compared to hers, his eyes sharp but not cruel. His body wrapped in heavy cloth with patches, and tears that showed long use. He looked tired but not broken, worn down by storms but not defeated. His hands were large, calloused, the hands of one who worked, who fought, who survived. He glanced at her again, then at the child who peeked from behind her shoulder. For a moment their eyes met, and something strange passed between them. An understanding, not words, not language, but something deeper. The mother felt the weight of it press against her heart. Still, fear whispered in her mind. Humans were said to be dangerous, full of tricks, full of violence. What if this one fed them only to trap them later? What if his kindness was nothing but bait? Her child whimpered again, eyes fixed on the bread that lay untouched on the stone. The smell of it filled the cave, soft, warm, almost sweet. The mother bit her lip until it bled, her body aching with hunger, her soul fighting itself. She whispered a prayer to the stars, then slowly reached out, her hand trembling. She pulled the bread closer, broke a small piece, and placed it gently into her child's mouth. The child chewed slowly, weak but smiling, eyes closing as if the simple food was the greatest gift in the galaxy. Tears filled the mother's eyes. The human watched silently, saying nothing, his expression unreadable in the firelight, but his shoulders seemed to loosen as if a heavy weight had left him. The mother tore another piece of the bread for herself, her hands shaking. The taste was dry, but it was life. It was hope. Her eyes stayed locked on the human, ready for betrayal, but none came. He only sat by the fire, stretching his hands to its warmth, closing his eyes for a moment as if he too was exhausted. The child, with a bit of strength returned, crawled closer to the warmth, still clutching their mother's arm. The human shifted slightly, making space by the fire. He said something in his own language, the words strange, deep, rolling like thunder. The mother could not understand, but the tone was gentle, not harsh, not commanding. It was the voice of someone offering safety. Hours passed like this, the storm outside screaming, the cave alive with firelight and the strange balance between fear and trust. The mother fed, her child the last crumbs of bread, her eyes never leaving the human. The fire cracked softly, and the child's head rested against her lap, drifting into sleep. The mother stroked the small forehead, her heart softer now, but her mind still. Wary, she finally spoke, her voice rough, her language broken. "Why? Help us," she asked, her words heavy with doubt. The human opened his eyes, meeting hers. For a moment he only looked at her, as if searching for something. Then he touched his chest, and slowly spoke, one word at a time. "Human. Help. Family." The words were simple, but their weight was heavy. The mother stared at him, not fully understanding, but the meaning reached her heart. Family. Her eyes lowered to her child, sleeping safe in her lap, breathing stronger than before. Her throat tightened and she whispered no reply, only watched the fire burn brighter. The human leaned back against the wall, his eyes closing again, his hand resting on the metal tool beside him, ready if danger came. The mother held her child, tighter, her gaze moving between the human and the cave entrance. The storm roared, but inside the cave there was warmth, food, and a strange new light. Not trust, not yet, but something close to it. A fragile thread connecting two lives that should never have met. The night stretched long, but for the first time in many nights, the mother felt they might live to see the morning. The fire burned brighter as the hours passed, its glow dancing on the cave walls like spirits of light. The alien mother sat with her child close, her body still tense, her eyes never fully leaving the human. He sat across from her, silent, his back resting against the cold stone, his face hidden by shadows and firelight. The child stirred awake, blinking at the warmth and staring at the human with wide eyes. Curiosity replaced fear, little by little, the small hands reaching out toward the flame as if to touch its magic. The mother caught those hands gently, pulling them back, whispering softly. The human watched and gave a small smile, faint but real, as if he understood without words. The night outside was wild. The storm howled through the mountains, but inside the cave the fire became a shield. Its warmth pushed back the cruel cold. Its crackling voice drowned the silence. Its light painted a fragile hope in the darkness. The mother fed her child the last crumb of bread, then sat quietly wondering how long this safety would last. She had lived too long with loss to believe in miracles, yet the fire and the stranger's kindness felt like one. The human moved suddenly, pulling another small pack from his side. The mother tensed, ready to shield her child again, but his motions were calm, careful. He pulled out strips of dried meat and some kind of root, placing them near the flame. The smell filled the cave, rich and strong, making the mother's empty stomach twist painfully. She looked away, ashamed of her need, but the child's eyes locked on the food with open hunger. The human broke the meat in half, offering one part across the fire. The mother hesitated, her pride fighting her desperation. But then her child whispered in a small, trembling voice, "Please." The word shattered her resistance. She reached out slowly, took the food, and whispered thanks in her own tongue. The human nodded once, as if he understood enough, then began to eat his share in silence. The child nibbled carefully, joy flickering in their eyes with every bite. The mother chewed slowly, letting the taste stay on her tongue, letting hope return piece by piece. Her gaze drifted back to the human, and she wondered, not for the first time, why. Why was he here? Why had he not left them to die? Why did he give when he could keep? Questions filled her mind, but answers did not come. Only the steady presence of the man across the fire. Hours passed, and the cave grew warmer with life. The child, now stronger, crawled closer to the flame, and this time the mother let them. The fire reflected in the child's bright eyes, glowing like tiny stars. The human reached into his pack once more, pulling out a flat metal device. He pressed a button, and a faint light projected onto the wall. Maps, stars, strange symbols. The mother gasped softly, clutching her child. Back in fear, the human looked at her, then slowly lowered the device, showing no threat, only sharing. He pointed to the stars on the wall, then to the ceiling of the cave as if to say, "This is where we are, this is the sky above us." The child giggled faintly, pointing at the glowing dots. The mother's heart softened against her will. The child had not laughed in weeks. She looked at the human again, studying his face in the glow, and she saw no trickery, only a weariness like her own. He was not here to conquer, not here to harm. He was here to survive, just as she was. The fire burned lower as the night grew deeper. Mother pulled her child close again, covering them with her thin cloak. Her eyes stayed open, alert, but her body begged for sleep. The human must have noticed, for he stirred the fire back to life and shifted closer to the cave entrance. He set his pack beside him, gripping a metal tool that gleamed faintly, his eyes fixed on the dark beyond the cave. It was as if he had silently taken the role of guard. The mother frowned, confused, yet relief washed over her heart. For the first time in many nights, she let her eyes close. Trusting not in fate but in the fire and the shadow of a human keeping watch, dreams came to her in fragments. Voices of her lost village, the warmth of family, the sound of laughter gone forever. She awoke with a start, hearing a low growl echo from outside the cave. The human was already standing, firelight catching, the sharp line of his jaw, his hand raised, signaling her to stay silent. The growl came again, closer, deeper. Shaking the icy ground, her child whimpered, clutching at her cloak, fear flooding the air once more. The human stepped toward the entrance, the firelight glowing against his back, casting him as a tall shadow in the mouth of the cave. The mother's breath froze, her heart beating wild. Something was out there, something that stalked the snow in hunger. The human turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. No words were spoken, but she understood his meaning. He would stand, he would fight. The cave was no longer only a shelter, it was becoming something else. A place where survival was shared, a place where a bond was beginning to form. And in the fire's glow, the darkness outside felt less endless. For in the cave there was light, courage, and the fragile beginning of trust. The growl outside faded, but the fear it left behind stayed heavy in the cave. The alien mother clutched her child close, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The firelight flickered against the walls, showing her the human's shape standing near the entrance, motionless but alert. He did not rush forward. He did not make a sound. Instead, he crouched low, pulling something from his pack. The mother could not see clearly, but she noticed the glint of metal, sharp and cold. The human's eyes narrowed. As he listened to the night, every muscle in his body ready, the mother's child whimpered softly and she hushed them quickly. Her mind raced with dread. She had lived on this frozen world long enough to know predators did not growl unless they were close, unless they were testing the silence. Something was hunting them. The storm outside was not enough to cover the sounds anymore. There were more noises now, faint scratching on the ice, low breaths carried by the wind. Not one creature, but many. The mother's blood turned cold. She had heard of these hunters before. The silent ones, creatures that moved in packs, their pale bodies blending with the snow, their voices low and cruel. The human knelt down and began working quickly, his hands steady. He set thin wires across the entrance of the cave, sharp hooks tied to them. The mother realized what he was doing. He was setting traps. Her fear mixed with awe. No one from her village had ever dared fight the silent ones. They ran or they died. But this human prepared to face them. The fire crackled, casting long shadows. The growls grew closer, circling, echoing through the rocks. The child buried their face in the mother's cloak, trembling. The mother bit her lip hard, her hands shaking, her mind screaming at her to run. But where could they go? The cave was their only shield. The human reached for his weapon, a long metal rod that hummed faintly with hidden energy. He crouched by the entrance, waiting. The mother stared at him, trying to understand. Why would a stranger risk his life for her and her child? What bound him to this moment? What drove him to stand against the darkness when even she had lost hope? The first shadow appeared at the edge of the firelight. A creature, pale as bone, its eyes glowing faintly with hunger, its limbs too long, its mouth stretching wide. The mother gasped, pulling her child back. The human did not flinch, his body still as stone. The creature stepped closer, careful, testing, its claws scraping the ice. Then suddenly it lunged forward. The trap snapped, wires slicing, hooks digging deep. The creature screamed, a terrible sound, sharp and broken. The human moved fast, his weapon striking, light flashing as it cut through flesh. The beast fell, writhing, its blood steaming against the snow. But there were more. Shapes moved in the storm, eyes glowing. hunger pulling them closer. The mother's breath caught in her throat. She whispered prayers she no longer believed in. The child began to cry, and she covered their mouth with her trembling hand. The storm roared, but the growls rose louder. The silent ones were many. The human shouted, his voice firm and strong. Not words she knew, but sounds that carried courage. He swung his weapon again, sparks flying. The traps caught two more creatures, their screams filling the cave mouth. But the pack did not stop. They pressed forward, more and more shadows pushing through the storm. The mother's eyes filled with terror. She could not just sit and watch. Her people had always hidden, always run. But now her child's life hung in the balance. Her body trembled as she stood, pulling a broken rock from the ground. It was nothing against such beasts, but her heart burned with something stronger than fear. If the human fought for them, then she could not stay helpless. One of the silent ones broke through the traps, rushing toward the fire, its claws reaching. The mother screamed, swinging the stone with all her strength. It struck the creature's head, not enough to kill, but enough to slow. The human finished it with a sharp strike of his weapon, his eyes flashing as he glanced at her. There was no anger in his gaze, only respect. The battle raged on, the fire crackled, shadows twisted, the cave filled with roars and screams. The mother fought beside the human, striking with desperate fury whenever a beast came close. Her child cried softly behind her, hidden by the cloak, but still alive, still breathing, still fighting to stay in this world. The pack finally broke. Their numbers thinned, their hunger. Turning to fear, the surviving creatures vanished into the storm, their cries fading into the night. The cave fell silent again, except for the crackle of fire and the heavy breathing of the human and the mother. Blood stained the snow, the traps torn, the ground littered with broken bodies. The human leaned on his weapon, his chest rising and falling, sweat freezing on his brow. The mother dropped the stone from her hand, her body weak, her knees shaking. Her child crawled forward, hugging her tightly, tears streaming down their small face. The mother looked at the human, her heart pounding with something new. Not just fear, not just gratitude, but a strange bond. They had fought together, and in that fire-lit cave, in the middle of a frozen world, they had survived. The silent ones had been driven back, but she knew they would return. Yet for now, the night belonged to them. For now, the cave was not only stone and fire, it was a fortress built from courage. And in the eyes of the human, she saw no stranger anymore. She saw an ally, a protector, maybe even the beginning of something greater. The cave was quiet after the battle, but it was not peace. Blood stained the snow at the entrance, steam rising from the broken bodies of the silent ones. The fire flickered weakly, struggling against the cold wind that slipped through cracks in the stone. The alien mother sat with her child close, her arms tight around them, her eyes never leaving the human. He was wounded, not deeply at first glance, but his movements were slow, his breath heavy, his hand pressing against his side where blood seeped through torn cloth. He tried to hide it, standing tall, checking his traps again, adjusting his weapon, as if nothing had happened. But the mother saw the truth in his eyes, a shadow of pain that he could not fully mask. Her child whispered softly, asking if he would die. The mother hushed them quickly, though her own fear was the same. She had seen strong hunters fall to smaller wounds, the cold and the storm turning scratches into death sentences. Her chest ached with helplessness, for the man who had fought so fiercely for them might now fall because of it. The night dragged on and the storm outside grew louder. The mother dozed lightly, but every sound from the human woke her. Every grunt of pain, every shift as he leaned against the stone wall. She wanted to move closer, to help, but her fear held her back. Humans were strong, yes, but what if his kindness ended when weakness began? What if he turned on them in anger, blaming them for his pain? Her thoughts broke when the child slipped from her arms and crawled across the floor. The little one moved to the human, placing a tiny hand on his knee. The mother gasped in fear, ready to snatch them back. But the human only looked down at the child, his eyes soft despite the blood on his lips. He reached out, ruffling the child's hair gently whispering something in his strange tongue. The mother's heart cracked, the fear and doubt inside her fighting against the warmth of that moment. Hours passed. The fire began to fade, and the mother gathered courage to act. She stood, moving to the human's side, kneeling carefully. Her hands shook as she pulled, cloth from her own cloak pressing it against his wound. He flinched but did not push her away. Instead, he looked into her eyes as if to ask, "Why help me?" she whispered softly. "You help us." Her voice was weak, but the meaning was clear. His lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile, before he leaned back and let her work. The night was not finished testing them. From the storm outside came another cry, sharper, closer. The mother's blood ran cold. The silent ones had not given up, the survivors had returned, and this time they were angry. The human tried to rise, but his wound slowed him, his weapon heavy in his hand. The mother grabbed the stone she had used before, her body trembling but her eyes burning with fire. The child hid behind the rocks, whispering prayers to stars that gave no answer. The first shadow burst into the cave. Claws flashing, the mother swung wildly, striking its head, sending it stumbling. The human stepped forward despite his pain, his weapon cutting through the air with a hiss of light. The creature fell, but more followed, their howls filling the cave. The cave became chaos, firelight flashing on pale bodies, roars shaking the stone walls. The human fought with fury, every strike powerful but slower than before. Blood poured from his side, his strength draining. Yet he did not fall, the mother screamed, swinging her rock again and again. Her arms burning, her fear turned into rage. They fought side by side, mother and human, against death itself. But then came the moment that broke her breath. One of the beasts slipped past, lunging toward her child. The mother's heart stopped, her scream rising, but the human moved faster than thought. He threw himself between the creature and the child, his weapon striking, his body taking the claws. The beast collapsed dead, but the human staggered, blood pouring heavier now, his knees buckling. The cave fell into silence again as the last of the pack fled into the storm. The mother rushed to the human, catching him as he fell, her hands, stained with his blood. Her child clung to her, sobbing, calling him protector in their tongue. The word echoed through the cave, filling it with something stronger than fear. The human's eyes half closed, his breath ragged, but still he smiled. Faintly, he touched the child's shoulder with a trembling hand, then the mother's, as if telling them both not to give up. The mother's chest ached as tears filled her eyes. She pressed her forehead against his, whispering, "No, you stay, you live." She had lost too much already. She would not lose. Him too. The breaking point had come. The storm, the beasts, the blood, everything tried to tear them apart. But the mother's heart had made its choice. This human was no stranger now, no passing shadow. He was family, and she would fight the stars themselves to keep him alive. The fire flickered low, but inside the cave, a new fire burned brighter, not of wood, but of bond, of trust, of something, born in pain and courage. The night was not yet over, and danger still circled outside. But the mother knew this truth. She would not let the human fall. Not while her child still called him protector. Not while hope still burned in her chest. The cave smelled of blood and smoke. The storm outside still howled, but inside the battle had ended. The alien mother sat beside the fire, her child pressed against her side, and the human lay stretched. On the cold ground, his breath shallow, his face pale. The mother tore strips from her own cloak, pressing them hard against his wounds. Her hands shook, but she did not stop, whispering softly to herself, words of strength, words of hope. The child helped in small ways, handing her cloth, holding the human's hand, whispering, "Protector," again and again. The words seemed to keep him awake, pulling him back from the edge each time his eyes closed too long. The mother remembered how she had feared him only nights ago. A stranger, a danger, a shadow that could mean death. Now she fought for his life with every breath in her body. Her heart pounded with a strange truth she could no longer deny. This human had given them food, warmth, courage, and now his blood for their safety. He was no longer just a traveler in the storm. He was part of them. The fire burned low, and she fed it with broken pieces of wood, even scraps of bone from the fallen beasts, anything that would keep the warmth alive. She knew without the fire, he would freeze before morning, her child curled, close, whispering questions she could not answer. Will he stay? Will he live? Will he wake? The mother kissed the child's forehead, hiding her tears, whispering, yes, he must. The hours dragged heavy. The human stirred in pain, groaning softly. The mother pressed water from melted snow to his lips, forcing him to drink. He coughed, but swallowed, his eyes opening just enough to meet hers. For a moment, their gazes locked, and in his eyes she saw not weakness but determination. He was fighting still, even on the edge of death. At dawn, the storm faded to silence. The world outside was painted white again, fresh snow covering the bodies of the silent ones. The mother stepped outside briefly, her child at her side, the cold air biting her skin. She searched the horizon hoping for signs of safety, but saw nothing but endless mountains and ice. No villages, no ships, no saviors, only the frozen world and the fragile family inside the cave. When she returned, the human was awake, his body weak but his eyes clear. He tried to rise, but pain forced him back. She pressed a hand to his chest, shaking her head, whispering, rest. He looked at her child who clung to his arm, then back at her. Slowly, with broken words in her tongue, he whispered, we, together. The mother froze, her heart pounding at the sound of those words. Together. Not strangers, not enemies, but something more. She nodded slowly, her throat too tight for words. The day passed with quiet work. The human, though weak, began to show her things. He drew shapes in the snow, teaching how to build better fire pits, how to sharpen stones into blades. He showed her how to tie broken wires into snares, traps for small animals that might pass near the cave. Even injured, he gave knowledge, planting seeds of survival. The mother listened closely, memorizing every move, every lesson, her respect for him growing with each passing moment. The child laughed again, chasing sparks from the fire, their small voice filling the cave with life. They began to call the human by a new word, not just protector, but family in their own alien tongue. At first the mother corrected them, but then she stopped, because in her heart she knew the child was right. That night they ate from the snares he had shown them how to set. The food was small but enough. The human smiled faintly, as the child shared bites with him, insisting he eat more than them both. The mother watched, her heart softening, her fear gone. In that moment she knew she would not survive this world without him, and he would not survive without her. Later, as the fire burned low, the mother whispered softly to him, you fight for us, you bleed for us. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. You are ours now. The human looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. No words were needed. The bond was sealed. The storm returned, howling louder than before, shaking the cave. But inside, the three of them sat close to the fire, the mother on one side, the child between them, the human leaning against the wall with his weapon resting beside him. The world outside was cruel, but in the heart of that frozen cave, something stronger had been born. Not just survival, but trust. Not just fire, but family. The mother closed her eyes, listening to the sound of her child's soft breathing. She felt the warmth of the fire, the steady presence of the human, and the strength that now flowed between them all. For the first time in her life, she did not feel alone. The bond of survival had become more than just a fight for life. It had become hope. The storm calmed at last, leaving the world silent and white. The frozen planet stretched endlessly under a pale sky, mountains rising like broken teeth, valleys filled with shadows, and rivers turned to stone. The alien mother stood at the mouth of the cave, her child holding tightly to her hand, the human leaning on his weapon like a crutch beside them. They had survived the long night, but survival, inside one cave, could not last forever. Food was scarce, wood for fire was gone, the beasts would return. If they stayed, death would come again sooner or later. The mother knew it, and she saw the same truth in the human's tired eyes. Her child looked up at them both, whispering in a small voice, "Where do we go?" The mother swallowed her fear and pointed toward the distant mountains. "Beyond," she said softly. "Maybe there is safety there." The human nodded once, his lips pressing together. Then he reached into his pack, pulling out the glowing device she had seen before. Stars and lines shimmered on its surface, and he pointed toward the mountains too. Together they agreed. Forward, the journey began with heavy steps. The snow reached high, the wind bit their skin. But they walked. The human moved slowly, his wounds slowing him, but he did not complain. The mother carried her child when their small legs grew weak, her arms aching, her breath shallow. They moved as one, never leaving each other, never breaking the fragile chain of survival. The world outside was deadly, but they carried warmth with them. Every time the child laughed at the crunch of snow, every time the human steadied the mother when she stumbled, every time the mother pressed food into their hands before eating herself, the bond between them grew. It was no longer about one saving the other. It was about saving each other. At night they built small fires against the rocks, the human showing them how to shield the flames from the wind. The mother cleaned his wound again, using herbs she found frozen in the cracks of stone, plants her people had once used long ago. The human flinched at the sting but stayed still, his eyes steady on hers. No words were spoken, but trust was stronger than words. The child curled close between them, their voice soft as they whispered, "Family." The word echoed in the silence, stronger than the storm. The mother and the human both looked at the child, then at each other. Something unspoken passed between them. Not fear, not doubt, but acceptance. Days passed, and the mountains drew closer. Each step was pain, but each step was hope. The frozen world still tried to break them, throwing hunger, cold, and silence at their hearts. But together they pushed back, carrying fire in their souls even when the wind tried to steal it. One evening they reached a ridge. From there the mother saw something she had thought lost forever. Smoke, rising faintly in the distance, not from beasts, but from fire made by hands. Her breath caught, tears filled her eyes, her child clapped with joy, and even the human smiled faintly. There was life out there. There was hope. But the way was still dangerous. Between them and that smoke lay valleys filled with shadows, where the silent ones would hunt again. The human gripped his weapon tightly, his face hard. The mother held her child close, her heart strong. They had survived the frozen cave. They had survived the breaking point, and now they would survive the journey together. That night, as they sat around the fire, the mother whispered softly, her voice carrying into the quiet air, "The stars are cruel, but they sent you." The human did not answer with words. He only placed his hand over hers, steady and firm. Her child pressed their tiny hand over both of theirs, smiling in the glow of the fire. In that moment, the cave, the storms, the blood, all of it faded into something greater. They were no longer just survivors, they were family. When morning came, the sun rose weakly through the clouds, painting the snow with silver light. The three of them stepped forward together, leaving behind the cave that had been both tomb and cradle. Each step toward the mountains was a promise, a defiance against the frozen planet that had tried to kill them. The silent ones might return, the storms might rage, but they would not fall alone. The mother, the child, and the human walked into the endless white, carrying something stronger than fear. They carried courage, they carried trust, they carried hope. And in the silence of the ice, the planet that had taken so much could not take that from them, for in the frozen wasteland, one human's courage had lit a fire that even the coldest night could not extinguish.